Some kids carry more than just hope. Some carry the future. And when the world comes to take it, how far would you go to protect it? What would you do if a 9-year-old boy in duct-taped boots told you he could heal your daughter? And he was right. It was the kind of morning that made you wish you'd stayed in bed. In Birmingham, Alabama, February meant gray skies, brittle wind, and just enough damp cold to settle in your bones without giving you the beauty of snow. Jonathan Reeves hated mornings like this. Hated the way the frost kissed his windshield, the way the air bit at his cheeks as he carried his daughter toward the big revolving doors of the Children's Medical Center. She was light. Too light. At 6 years old, Isla should have been running circles around him. She should have been chasing their dog through the backyard, climbing trees, scraping her knees. Instead, she lay silent in his arms, her legs wrapped in a soft pink blanket, her head resting against his shoulder, her wide brown eyes staring at nothing. Jonathan adjusted his grip on her, trying to shield her from the wind as he hurried across the parking lot. His tie flapped loose at his chest, his collar askew. He didn't care. Behind them, cars hissed by on the wet pavement. People rushed in and out of the hospital doors, their scarves trailing behind them, clutching coffee cups and cell phones as if moving faster would outrun whatever pain had brought them here. And then Jonathan saw him. A boy. Sitting there. On a flattened cardboard box by the entrance. At first glance, he looked like any other kid. Maybe even younger than Isla. But then Jonathan noticed the details. His jacket was too big, sleeves rolled halfway up his arms. His boots were scuffed and split at the seams, one of them patched with strips of silver duct tape. A red knit cap was pulled low over his ears, and he held a battered notebook in his lap, pencil scratching quietly as he watched people come and go. He didn't beg, didn't say a word, just watched. Jonathan's jaw tightened as he passed. Another reminder of the kind of world they lived in. Kids sitting outside hospitals, invisible, forgotten. He hated it, but he didn't stop. Not until he heard a voice behind him. "Sir." It was soft, but clear enough to cut through the shuffle of footsteps and the whisper of the wind. Jonathan kept walking. "Sir." He stopped, turned. The boy had stood up now, tucking his notebook under his arm, his big jacket shifting awkwardly on his thin frame. His eyes, startlingly dark, startlingly calm, met Jonathan's. "I can make your daughter walk again." Jonathan froze. For a second, he thought he'd misheard. The words didn't make sense. "What?" The boy took a step forward. "I said, I can help her walk again." Jonathan stared at him. Then down at Isla, still nestled against his chest, still silent. "That's not funny, kid." The boy didn't flinch. "I wasn't joking." Jonathan's hands tightened around his daughter as his heart thudded painfully against his ribs. This was ridiculous. He turned and strode into the hospital, the automatic doors sliding shut behind him with a hiss. But he couldn't shake the boy's voice. Couldn't shake those calm, steady eyes. Inside, the hours crawled by. Therapy session after therapy session. Neurologists and physical therapists in sterile white coats. Terms like managing expectations, and long road ahead, and miracles take time. Jonathan nodded. He always nodded. But something in him was louder today. By the time he and Isla emerged back into the chill afternoon air, he'd half convinced himself he'd imagined the boy. But there he was. Still there. Still watching. Jonathan stopped at the curb, adjusting Isla on his hip. She'd fallen asleep during her last session, her little face slack, her hand curled against his tie. The boy stood. "Again. You again," Jonathan muttered. He took a step toward him before he could stop himself. "Why would you say something like that?" Jonathan demanded, keeping his voice low. "You think this is some kind of joke?" The boy shook his head, his notebook clutched tightly to his chest. "No, sir. You don't even know her yet. But I can help her." Jonathan laughed bitterly, though it sounded more like a cough. "You're what, 9? Almost 10? And you think you know something the doctors don't?" "Exactly 9, the boy said. "Well, here's something you should know. My daughter has been through more in 6 years than you could imagine. She's been poked and prodded and cut open and stitched up and still can't move her legs. So don't stand there and tell me you can fix her." The boy didn't look away. "I don't have to know her to help her." Jonathan stared at him, at his cracked glasses hanging from his collar, at his too big coat, at his taped-up boots. He should have walked away. He almost did. But something in the boy's voice, quiet, steady, certain, hooked him. Jonathan huffed, shifting Isla's weight as he reached for his car keys. "Fine. You want to waste your time, kid? Meet me at Harrington Park tomorrow. Noon. Don't be late." The boy nodded. "I'll be there." That night, Jonathan couldn't sleep. He sat at his desk long after Isla had gone to bed, staring at contracts he couldn't focus on. That voice kept running circles in his head. "I can help her." He was crazy for even thinking about it. Absolutely crazy. But when he finally drifted into a shallow sleep, he dreamed of Isla, running. The next morning came fast. Too fast. Jonathan found himself standing at the door of Isla's room, watching her sleep in her chair, her blanket slipping off her knees. For the first time in months, she looked peaceful. He took a deep breath. "All right, sweetheart," he murmured. "Let's give this kid his hour." At exactly 11:57, he pulled up to Harrington Park. And there he was. The boy. Already waiting on a bench beneath a sprawling oak tree. A towel folded neatly beside him and a small gym bag at his feet. Jonathan's heart thudded uncomfortably as he got Isla out of the car and wheeled her over. The boy stood. "Hi again," he said politely. Jonathan only nodded. Isla, curious now, waved shyly. "Hi," she said softly. The boy smiled faintly. "Hi, Isla." Jonathan's head whipped toward him. "How do you know her name?" "You said it yesterday," the boy replied. "I remember things." Jonathan raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "So, what now, Magic Carpet Ride?" Jonathan muttered. The boy ignored him. "No, sir. Just the basics." He opened his bag, pulling out simple supplies. Socks, a tennis ball, a jar of cocoa butter, and what looked like warm rice wrapped in a towel. Jonathan folded his arms. "This is your big secret?" The boy didn't answer. He just knelt by Isla's chair, unwrapped her blanket, and laid the warm pack gently over her thighs. "Too hot?" he asked. She shook her head, her eyes closing. "It feels good." Jonathan found himself leaning forward, despite himself. And for the next hour, he watched as the boy worked. Soft rotations of her legs, pressure on her knees, quiet encouragement. Jonathan wanted to laugh, but he didn't, because for the first time in 6 months, he saw something he hadn't seen before. Oh, and it scared him more than anything else in the world. You wouldn't believe a boy in duct-taped boots could change your life, until you saw him do it with your own eyes. The wind had quieted by the time Jonathan carried Isla into the park the next day. The air still had a bite to it, but the sun fought through the clouds, streaking the cracked blacktop and patchy grass with weak light. Harrington Park wasn't much to look at. A basketball court with half its chain-link fence missing, a jungle gym missing 2 swings, a tired soccer field that hadn't seen paint in years. But it was empty at noon on a Sunday, and that was all Jonathan cared about. He pushed Isla's chair across the uneven sidewalk, his eyes scanning automatically. And there he was. The boy. Already there, already waiting. Sitting on the same bench beneath the oak tree, his bag at his feet and his towel already spread out on the grass. The same too big jacket, the same red knit hat, the same boots, still wrapped in duct tape. But today, the notebook was gone. Today he was ready. Jonathan squared his shoulders as he wheeled Isla over. The boy stood politely when they reached him. "Hi again," he said, nodding. Jonathan returned the nod stiffly, still not sure why he was even here. Isla, however, gave a shy little wave. "Hi." And the boy, Zeke, as Jonathan would finally allow himself to call him, smiled faintly. "Hi, Isla." Jonathan frowned. "You're sure about this?" Zeke nodded once. "Yes, sir." Jonathan set the brake on Isla's chair. "Fine. But you so much as hurt her." "I won't." Jonathan hesitated another moment, then stepped back. Zeke knelt in front of Isla. "Is it okay if I move your legs again?" he asked gently. Isla glanced at her father. Jonathan gave the tiniest nod. Isla looked back at Zeke. "Okay." Zeke started with the warm rice pack again, laying it over her thighs. He didn't rush. He didn't force anything. He just waited. Zeke's voice was low, because she smiled. Jonathan said nothing, just stared at him. Then, finally, he exhaled. Fine. Next week. The next Sunday they came back. And the next. And the next. And each week, Isla seemed lighter, brighter, happier, and maybe, just maybe, stronger. Jonathan still didn't quite believe it. Not really. But he couldn't stop coming back, because every week he saw it. The little spark in Isla's eyes. The way her feet twitched when Zeke worked on them. The way she laughed when he teased her about her pink blanket. And he couldn't walk away from that. On the fourth Sunday, something was different. When they arrived, Isla's eyes were red. She wouldn't look at Zeke. Wouldn't look at anyone. What happened? Zeke asked gently. I tried, she whispered. I tried to move my legs this morning, and nothing happened. Her voice cracked. Jonathan's jaw tightened. She's been frustrated all weekend, he said quietly. Zeke nodded, kneeling beside her again. You think I never get tired? He asked softly. Isla blinked at him. You think I never sat in a shelter and cried because my mom couldn't afford her medicine? Because I couldn't fix it. Isla stared at him. You're allowed to be mad, he said gently. But if you stop trying now, the part of you that wants to walk might stop trying too. Isla swallowed hard. Her voice was barely a whisper. I'm scared. Jonathan froze. It was the first time she'd said that out loud. Zeke reached out, resting a hand lightly on hers. I'm scared too, he admitted. But scared doesn't mean stop. It just means you're close to something big. Isla sniffled, then nodded. Okay, she whispered. That day, she moved her foot for the first time. Jonathan saw it, felt it, and for the first time in months, he believed. That night, Jonathan stood outside his house, staring at the moon. He didn't know what Zeke really was. Didn't know where he came from, or why he was here. But he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't walking away. But then, the next Sunday, something changed. When they arrived at the park, there were people waiting. Not just one or two. Half a dozen families. Parents with kids in wheelchairs. Kids with walkers. Kids with braces on their legs. All watching him. Watching Zeke. And Zeke just stood there. Still calm. Still steady. Jonathan turned to him, lowering his voice. You don't have to do this. But Zeke just adjusted the strap on his bag and looked at the waiting families. I want to, he said quietly. And then he stepped forward. They came for help. But the boy in the duct-taped boots carried more than just hope. He carried secrets that could shatter everything. That Sunday, Harrington Park was alive in a way Jonathan hadn't seen in years. When he pulled into the cracked parking lot with Isla tucked into the back seat, families were already waiting on the grass. Parents clutching travel mugs and folding chairs. Kids shifting nervously in wheelchairs or clinging to walkers. Quiet, tentative faces turned toward one figure sitting on the bench under the oak tree. Zeke. The boy still wore his battered red hat, his oversized jacket, and his boots, duct tape still wrapped around the toes. But now he sat upright, watching the families gather, his gym bag at his feet. Jonathan got out slowly, lifting Isla into her chair. She was already smiling. Not nervous. Not afraid. Just smiling. Zeke looked up and gave her a faint nod. Hi, Isla. Hi, she called back. Jonathan wheeled her to their usual patch of grass. One of the other fathers stepped forward, holding his son's walker. Is it true? The man asked in a low voice. Is it really this kid? Jonathan glanced at Zeke, who was calmly rolling out his towel. He gave the man a tight nod. You'll see. Zeke started with Isla, as always. Warm rice packs. Gentle rotations. Soft, steady words. But now the families were watching, too. Jonathan folded his arms, feeling the eyes of the crowd on them. It was strange, he thought, how everyone here, everyone broken, tired, scared, was staring at a boy with nothing, like he held the answers they'd all been searching for. And maybe he did. By the second hour, Zeke was moving between kids, showing a mother how to work a rice pack into her daughter's hamstring, guiding a teenage boy's trembling foot through its first steps forward. Parents leaned in, asking questions, taking notes. Jonathan watched quietly. He still didn't understand how Zeke knew what to do, but he couldn't deny what he saw. The smallest movements, the quiet smiles, the hope that had taken hold in this tired little park. After the families left, Jonathan crouched next to Zeke as the boy packed his things. "You okay with all of this?" Jonathan asked. Zeke didn't look up. "As long as it's not about me," he said softly. "It's about them." Word spread fast after that. The next weekend, there were a dozen families waiting. The weekend after, nearly 20. A pastor brought folding chairs. A diner started dropping off bagels and coffee. Somebody printed flyers that simply said, "Free movement sessions. Sundays at noon. Harrington Park." Nobody even needed to write Zeke's name. Everyone already knew. One Sunday, a reporter showed up. Young woman with a notepad and a camera. Jonathan caught Zeke's arm before the woman could approach. "You don't have to talk to her," he murmured. Zeke just adjusted the strap on his bag and looked at the crowd of waiting kids. "I want to." The next morning, the Birmingham Post ran a story on page 2. The boy with the duct-taped boots, helping kids walk again, one step at a time. The story didn't give his last name, at his request, but it didn't matter. People found out. A local doctor offered to mentor him. A non-profit reached out to fund his supplies. A retired therapist volunteered free tutoring. Jonathan found himself watching Zeke more closely now. Who was this kid? Where had he come from? How could a boy so broken, homeless, orphaned, have such steady hands, such a full heart? And more than that, what was he hiding? That night, Jonathan sat at his computer long after Isla went to bed. He typed into Google, "Ezekiel Carter Birmingham." The search returned almost nothing. A scattered mention in an old-school newsletter. A faded article about his mother, Monique Carter, who used to run a small community clinic. No current address. No next of kin. No recent record of enrollment anywhere. It was like Zeke had disappeared. Except here he was. Every Sunday. One particularly cold Sunday, Jonathan finally asked the question. It was just the two of them, packing up supplies while the families drifted away. "You got a place to sleep?" Jonathan asked quietly. Zeke froze, then shrugged. "Sometimes." Jonathan rubbed the back of his neck. "You ever think about coming to stay with us?" "For a while." Zeke glanced up sharply. "You serious?" Jonathan nodded. "You wouldn't be in the way." Zeke hesitated, then looked down at his boots. "You sure your neighbors wouldn't mind a kid like me?" Jonathan gave a short laugh. "After what you've done for my daughter, they'd better not say a word." The next morning, Zeke showed up on Jonathan's front porch. Backpack slung over one shoulder. Rolled up blanket under his arm. Jonathan opened the door in sweatpants and a coffee mug. "Right on time," he said. Isla squealed from the hallway. "Zeke." He gave her a shy smile. "Hey, superstar." Jonathan stepped aside. "Welcome home." Life settled into a rhythm. Zeke got his own room. A soft bed. Clean sheets. He didn't say much, but he never missed a morning stretch with Isla. And she was moving both feet now. Not walking yet, but close. So close. Late one night, as Jonathan washed dishes, he spoke without turning. "You ever think about going back to school?" Zeke, who was sketching at the kitchen table, glanced up. "Sometimes." Jonathan nodded. "You're smart. You could go far." Zeke tilted his head. "I just want to help people walk again. Like my mom did." Jonathan turned, leaning against the counter. "Then we'll figure out how to get you there." Zeke gave him a faint smile. "Okay." But not everyone was happy. That Sunday, after another packed session at the park, a sleek black car pulled up at the curb. Jonathan noticed it first. A tinted Cadillac. Expensive. Out of place here. The window rolled down just enough for a man's eyes to glint in the sunlight. He stared straight at Zeke and smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Then the car pulled away. Jonathan watched it go, a chill running down his spine. And for the first time since meeting Zeke, he felt a deep unease settle in his chest. That night, Jonathan cornered Zeke in the kitchen. "Who was that?" he demanded. Zeke froze, his hands tightening on his glass of water. His voice was low. "Nobody," he said. But Jonathan didn't believe him. And when he glanced out the front window later that night, the black car was back, idling at the corner, waiting. You can teach a child to walk again. But can you teach him to outrun his past? The black Cadillac showed up again the following Sunday. It idled at the curb as Zeke worked, quietly watching Isla take her first full steps without falling. The families cheered. Parents clapped. Someone even started crying. But the man inside the car never moved. He just sat there, waiting. Jonathan noticed. And he hated the way Zeke kept glancing at it, like it was a ghost he couldn't shake. That night, after Isla went to bed, Jonathan finally confronted him. He found Zeke sitting at the kitchen table, sketching in his weather-beaten notebook. "You're gonna have to tell me what's going on," Jonathan said flatly. "That car has been parked out there 2 weeks in a row." Zeke didn't look up. Jonathan took a deep breath. "Who is he, Zeke? Who's watching you?" Zeke's pencil stopped. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his voice came, barely above a whisper. "My uncle." Jonathan blinked. "Your uncle?" Zeke nodded slowly. Jonathan pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. "What does he want?" Zeke's eyes flicked to the window, then back to the page. "He wants me to come back." "Back where?" Zeke's jaw tightened. "The group home. The one they sent me to after my mama died. He runs it now." Jonathan's stomach dropped. He'd heard stories about those homes. Too many kids. Not enough beds. Not enough care. And some worse than others. Jonathan spoke carefully. Was he bad to you?" Zeke's eyes stayed on the paper. "You learn to stop talking in a place like that," he said finally. "Otherwise they find ways to shut you up." Jonathan felt his fists clench under the table. "That's not a home," he said quietly. Zeke's pencil started moving again. "No," he murmured. "But it's where they say I belong." Jonathan shook his head. "You don't belong there. Not anymore." Zeke glanced up then, his eyes sharp and strange in the kitchen light. "That's not your choice," he said. "Not mine either." The next morning, the Cadillac was still there. When Jonathan left for work, he pulled over next to it. The driver's window slid down, and the man inside smiled. He was tall, lean, with a slick black suit and sunglasses even though the sun hadn't fully risen. "Mr. Reeves," he drawled. "Nice to finally meet you. I'm Paul Carter. I believe you're housing my nephew." Jonathan forced a smile. "He's not your property." Paul's grin widened, but his eyes stayed cold. "That boy has been a ward of the state since he was 6. You think just because he's been playing doctor out in some dirty park he suddenly belongs to you?" Jonathan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Paul leaned closer. "You think you're helping him, but you're not. Trust me. He's better off with me." Jonathan held his gaze. And then he said something he hadn't planned to say. "You're going to have to go through me first." Paul's smile faded, just a fraction. But then he chuckled, rolled his window back up, and drove away. That Sunday, the park felt different. More families than ever. More cameras now. Even a small news crew. But under the surface, there was tension. Zeke was quieter than usual. His hands shook a little as he wrapped Isla's legs. Jonathan kept glancing at the curb, half expecting to see the Cadillac. And then it happened. Halfway through Isla's session, the black car pulled up and parked just yards away. The driver's door opened, and Paul stepped out. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, watching. The parents noticed. The kids noticed. Everyone fell silent. Zeke froze mid-stretch, his eyes locking with Paul's. Jonathan stepped forward, planting himself between them. Paul only smiled faintly. "Enjoy your little circus," he called. loud enough for everyone to hear. Won't last. Then he turned, got back in his car, and drove off. But the damage was done. That night, Zeke didn't come down for dinner. Jonathan knocked gently on his door. When there was no answer, he opened it anyway. The boy was sitting on the bed, still in his jacket and boots, staring at the floor. Jonathan sat down beside him. "You're safe here," he said softly. Zeke shook his head. "You don't get it. He's not gonna stop. He doesn't have to. He just calls somebody. Then one night, I'm gone. Just like my mama." Jonathan stared at him. "What do you mean?" Zeke swallowed hard. "They said she overdosed. But she didn't. I saw him. Saw what he did to her." Jonathan felt ice creep into his chest. Zeke finally looked up, his eyes shining with something Jonathan couldn't quite name. "Maybe it should have been me," Zeke said quietly. "Would have been easier." Jonathan grabbed his shoulders. "Don't you ever say that," he said sharply. "Don't you dare." Zeke blinked at him, startled. Jonathan's voice dropped. "You're not done here. You hear me? You've got work to do. With Isla. With all of them. You're not done." And for the first time in weeks, Zeke let himself nod. The next morning, Jonathan called a lawyer. He called the therapist who'd volunteered for Zeke. He called everyone he could think of. And that afternoon, he filed emergency guardianship papers. He knew it wouldn't stop Paul. Not yet, but it was a start. Sunday came. Zeke was quiet but focused. Isla was stronger than ever, taking full steps now, leaning only slightly on Jonathan's arm. The crowd cheered as she made it to the swing set and back. But Jonathan's eyes were on the curb, because he knew Paul wasn't done either. And sure enough, halfway through the session, the Cadillac pulled up. This time, Paul didn't get out, but the window rolled down just enough for him to call out. "You can fight me if you want, Reeves," he said. "But everyone pays their debts eventually. Even little heroes." And then he was gone. That night, Jonathan tucked Isla into bed. But when he went to check on Zeke's room, the bed was empty. The window was open. And a note sat on the pillow. It said only 3 words. "I'm sorry, Zeke." Jonathan tore through the house, his heart pounding. The driveway was empty. The street was quiet. But then, at the corner, he saw it. The black Cadillac. Its taillights glowing in the dark. And in the back seat, a small figure, staring out the window, eyes wide and shining. And somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of sirens began to wail. Do you still think anything is impossible? Well, if you stay tuned, we will find out.